Privileged to welcome our speakers today. We have Sally Coulthard, Julia Durbin, and Imogen Jackson. Retired Colonel Sally Coulthard, MBE, is a graduate of Durham, Cambridge, and Coventry universities. In 1982, she was commissioned into the Royal Army Education Corps, where she had a 39-year career in education, training, welfare, and personnel strategy. In 2018, she studied an MSc in Social and Therapeutic Horticulture and undertook a Churchill Fellowship researching nature-based therapy for military veterans in the US and Scandinavia. And she is the founder and the CEO of the Defence Garden Scheme. Julia Durbin is a horticultural therapist with the Eden Project and is currently involved in the Defence Garden Scheme's Nature Connections. She started her career as a plant scientist at the Royal Botanic Gardens in Kew. After taking time out to travel, she joined the BBC, where she worked as a science journalist and a project manager for over 2 decades. After volunteering at a homeless charity in London's East End, she also trained as a horticultural therapist, and since qualifying has worked in a number of gardens for people with mental health and addiction issues. Imogen Jackson is Head of Adult Wellbeing at the Wiltshire Wildlife Trust, and she works with the Wild Transitions Group, part of the Defence Garden Scheme. She holds an MSc in Social and Therapeutic Horticulture from Coventry University and has over 20 years of experience in mental health support roles. Throughout her career as a head gardener and horticultural therapy practitioner at Horatio's Garden in the Midlands. Also as a horticultural instructor and horticultural therapy practitioner at the Bethlehem Royal Psychiatric Hospital, and also in various roles within Mind BLMK. She has encouraged the use of horticulture, environmental conservation and green spaces to empower individuals to manage their mental health by connecting with nature. And it's a great honour for me to pass over to our first speaker, Sally, who will share her screen and her presentation on the Defence Garden Scheme, Concept to Capability.
Thank you, Jenny, very much indeed for that introduction and for this opportunity for us all to take part in this international seminar series. We're delighted to be here. Julia and I and Imogen, we're delighted to be here and to be able to share our differing experiences of working with the Defence Garden Scheme. We've divided our seminar into 3 stages. I shall start with a high-level overview of the history and the operating model of the Defence Gardens, or DGS, as more commonly known. And then I will hand over to the real subject matter experts, the practitioners out in the gardens. That is Julia, who leads our service delivery at Eden, and Imogen, who leads course programmes at Wiltshire Wildlife Trust. Starting at the beginning, what is the Defence Garden Scheme? The concept behind what is now a nationwide network of gardens started in 2017. As Jenny has introduced, after almost 40 years serving in the military as an educator and then in personnel strategy and policy, particularly for personnel and recovery, as my resettlement, I studied a master's in social and therapeutic horticulture, where I was lucky enough to meet Imogen and Julia. From that point, the real game changer was a Churchill Fellowship, where I was able to visit Scandinavia and the United States on an 8-week funded research project and really get close to a wide variety of specialist nature-based provision for the armed forces. As the title of this seminar says, this is our journey so far. That concept development phase starting with the research and then the fellowship, and then an opportunity to pilot in fact, January 2019 at our first garden on the border in Fermanagh between Northern and Southern Ireland. The Churchill Fellowship was particularly formative because it funds you to travel and learn from experience. And so being able to combine that research experience with my military experience, and particularly the military recovery process and requirements, we started to piece together an evidence-based operating model that has since been refined over the last 5 years. So after that pilot, Obviously, we had some adaptations to do in our regional rollout phase in phase 2 with COVID, but that did give, we did manage to keep service delivery going in an adapted phase throughout 2020 and 21, and also took the opportunity to write our manual. So we started to roll out in that phase, continued the rollout in 2022, and as this presentation will show, we're now in a strong evaluation phase, which is consolidating all the work that we've done so far. So this is our current network, and the red gardens are those that are taking part in the major evaluation project, which I'll come on to. What I'd like to do today is talk over 3 areas: the policy context in my overview, the policy context, why we're doing what we did, what led to that in 2019, our operating model, and then, as I say, finish with the current evaluation. I've just taken 2 examples for the policy context. Those that were relevant in 2019. The need is still there, and there are many, many documents from the Ministry of Defence and elsewhere that could be used to indicate the need. But these are just the 2 examples that were pertinent at the time we were developing the concept. And it's that second one in particular, that bespoke, holistic, soft landing for those individuals that are struggling with the transition from a military to a civilian community. And I think we all can recognise that spending 1 morning a week for 10 weeks in a garden and an outdoor environment with supported help and the time and space to think through your transition is almost the definition of a bespoke, holistic and soft landing for those that need it. So that was the context. We had the research, we were developing the research, and then I had a call in January 2019 from Brook House Health and Wellbeing Centre that operates out of a large park and stately home in Northern Ireland. They had a walled garden, you could argue an outdoor classroom, and they had a group of veterans that they felt would really benefit from green therapy. So even though I hadn't quite retired, there was an opportunity there to pilot that first course with our delivery partner, Brook House Health and Wellbeing Centre. So the model we started to develop operates at 3 levels. The strategic is a hub and spoke model of community-based mental health care. I don't take any credit for that. I've just adapted the advice from Dame Carol Black, who at the time was an advisor to what was Public Health England, and also an advisor to the Defence and National Rehabilitation Centre. So you will hear about 2 hub gardens where we deliver our 10-week evidence-based course. But we're also growing, as resources allow, the spoke gardens, the community gardens that already exist that are not military only, and who wish to support the military community and are available all year. Our programmes only run in the spring, summer, starting in April, and the autumn, winter, starting in September. So the hub gardens are delivering twice a year, currently for a capacity of about 100 a year, and the spoke gardens are there all the time if somebody comes along and needs support either before coming on one of the courses or indeed afterwards as part of progression. The operating model is that we partner with veterans' mental health charities. So, for example, SAFA, the Royal British Legion, Walking with the Wounded, or a smaller setup like Brook House Health and Wellbeing Centre. So these partners are critical because they own the recovery. They have case managers. They own the recovery pathway of the individual. Our swim lane, based on the model I researched at the Chicago Botanic Garden, is that we deliver and evaluate our 10-week course. We don't own the mental health care recovery pathway of the individual. And then in more detail, I'll talk you through now the actual course that Imogen and Julia deliver, which we've developed together as we have with the other practitioners and occupational therapists since that first pilot in January 2019. And of course, with veteran input and practitioner input and gardener partner input. The work that we've done so far is documented in these two documents, that the Churchill Fellowship and the modelling and the different models that I explored on the fellowship is available through the DGS website from the research page. And then the actual handrail, the 10 session plans, the concepts behind what we do, the balancing of each sessions between practical horticulture and mental health support is part of the Defence Garden Scheme concept manual. That is not available online. I still haven't ever got my head above water to concentrate on how I protect it with intellectual property rights, and I'm reliably told it's worth quite a lot of money. So it's not a secret, but it is obviously something that we don't just have online available without knowing where it's being used. It provides us with an important fidelity of delivery across all our gardens. We deliberately, we don't go around and police what the practitioners are doing. They work with the garden and with the group, but it is a handrail, and it does provide, particularly for commissioners and funders, reassurance that in each garden we follow the same pattern. So this is the pattern and the delivery model. As I've mentioned, a practical balance, I would say probably about 70% practical horticultural skills in a session, and then a balance of physical, social, cognitive, emotional outcomes, including mindfulness, reflection, and journaling as part of that support for individuals to start to manage their own, perhaps, anxiety or depression. We make sure that the sessions are connected to the National Health Service's endorsed 5 ways to wellbeing. And one aspect that some of the gardens find useful, but this is very much something that the groups decide, they might set up a WhatsApp group for peer support that the practitioners are part of at the beginning of the course. And then if they want to keep it for social connections, they've got that as the course finishes. The third area that I wanted to mention, which is now pulling together, as I say, all of that work, is our service evaluation. And we were really delighted as a very small charity community interest company that's only 3 years old, that last year, exactly a year ago, we were awarded one of 10 major national grants. It's a 3-year project funded by the Armed Forces Covenant Fund Trust. This covers all our 6 hub gardens, and it's going to allow us to gather, which we've already started, quantitative and qualitative data on up to 100 veterans. And importantly, it's going to allow us to do a social cost-benefit analysis. So this is the aim of our project is called Transformational Nature-Based Prescriptions. The aim is in the blue box on the left, increasing the understanding, particularly, we hope, in the Department of Health and Social Care and amongst integrated commissioning boards. And we hope, while we're clearly not going to get the same sort of evidence that GlaxoSmithKline can do on a medical prescription, we hope and we will be aiming with our data on 100 veterans to create a weight of evidence that we can use to contribute to green prescribing policy discussions and commissioning decisions. As part of TMP, we have got 3, I'm delighted to say, 3 very strong evaluation partners. We've got Edinburgh Napier University Military Research Hub. I'll just talk a little bit about the literature review that has been completed. And I'm delighted to say that Fiona Thackeray is part of the transformation of the TMP project board and has obviously contributed already to that literature review. We've got immersive visiting the gardens, qualitative and quantitative data collection, which again started, we're doing 3 cohorts. So we've completed the first cohort in the autumn of last year at 5 gardens and a capacity of 40 veterans. And then I'm particularly delighted that Pro Bono Economics are doing a quantitative analysis for our social cost benefit analysis. These 3 partners are now beginning to work together really well, and the sum is quite quickly becoming more than a total of the parts. The literature review. From our academic background, we were aware of the gaps in the academic evidence for nature-based therapy, but equally, and that predicated the grant application. However, obviously we would say that, and we needed it validated. So Edinburgh Napier went out in September. They've reviewed over 100 articles and identified a number of gaps which we are managing to fill. That it is, there is very little evidence of nature-based therapy on a cross-UK basis, and particularly with the longitudinal. We will do veteran follow-up 6 months after being on the course. It is a reasonable sample size. There's lots of evidence of smaller groups of 8 and 10, but not of what we hope will be 100. And we are doing the cost-benefit analysis. So that literature review has validated the approach. It will be published, and it's helped anchor the work that we started to do in service delivery in the autumn. The qualitative feedback from Neighbourly Lab based on the 40, we'll obviously repeat that now in the spring with 6 gardens, so with a capacity of 48, and then again we'll repeat again in the autumn with possibly 6 or 7 gardens, so again reasonably expecting a capacity of 48 again. So the feedback and the themes that Neighbourly Lab have fed back are summarised here, that our group, our cohort, really appreciate the fact that it's a veteran-only environment that helps them feel safe and reassured. The opportunity to spend time outdoors in the space, the light touch, the social connections that I've mentioned, whether those are just within the course and the group or whether they're longer and more enduring, and particularly this holistic approach, the fact that all aspects, including in many cases some spiritual and social aspects of an individual's life, can be incorporated and supported through the delivery team. I don't, and this is Fiona advising me really as part of when she heard this feedback in December, it's not only sharing the positive things, well, they're still positive because we can learn from them, but Neighbourly Lab identified 2 particular challenges to service delivery, which we think may be relevant and useful to share, for they're not just limited to the military cohort. It's probably about messaging and messaging out on the ground and really communicating to potential participants, particularly those that might be worried that, for example, travel can be expensed, various things, and also offering the fact that there are spoke gardens if you're not ready for a more formal or a 10-week commitment. But also about accessibility, particularly for our referral partners, those that are working with veterans who've maybe lost limbs or have got sight loss, like Sight Scotland, just really making sure those delivery partners, referral partners, sorry, can visit the gardens and make sure that it would be useful and accessible for their particular veterans. In conclusion, before handing over to Julia and Imogen for a more grounded perspective of this sort of slightly high-level strategy and academic approach, I thought I'd just leave you with 4 or 5 quotes from veterans themselves in their own words. This comes from across the network, from all the gardens over the last few years. Obviously, we could produce lots of them, but I think this is just quite a useful way of moving on to Julia, who is working out on the ground with the groups of veterans, now about to start her 5th cohort at Eden. Julia, thank you.
Hello, this is a picture of the roundhouse in our rather beautiful Vounder therapy garden on the outside, the outer estates at the Eden project. So we're not down in the main site with the big domes. And the reason that we are where we are is that a lot of people who come to us find crowds very, very difficult. So we're not a walled garden, but we are surrounded by Cornish hedges and the trees that grow on top of them. The Defence Garden Scheme is one of a series of horticultural therapy programmes that we run at Eden. And the we, in this case, is my colleague James Clark, who is training with Thrive as a horticultural therapy practitioner, myself, who did an MSc in social and therapeutic horticulture, and our horticulturalist, Vicky. So we have a wealth of horticultural experience and a considerable amount of horticultural therapy experience. But one of the advantages of working at Eden is that the Defence Garden Scheme is not the only programme that we run. So we have quite a lot of data that we can collect and compare DGS with the other programmes. So I was lying in bed the other morning and I worked out that we run approximately 200 sessions a year, of which 20 are Defence Garden Schemes. So we have quite a lot of data to compare this approach and group with the other approaches and group that we put together. So if you change the slide for me, Sal, that would be lovely. So what's different about DGS? Well, the thing that I've noticed is it's the people. You need a lot more tasks to fill a session if you've got a whole load of veterans. And we actually have quite a few people who are service leavers because we've made a link with Haslar, the Royal Naval Hospital in Plymouth. They bond together as a team really, really quickly, and they problem solve on the hoof. So we have created 2 gardens, a green woodworking area, and next session's project is a foraging space and stumpery inside the garden. The banter between them can be absolutely brutal if you are not somebody that is used to forces humour. And we sometimes need a translator. And what our translator is a veteran that used to drive tanks. So when I'm about to go, he is the person that just, chilled, everybody's got it, it's all okay. But we do need to bear in mind that people need to talk about their experiences. And we have had, in previous cohorts, quite a lot of nurses and have found that the exchange of, for want of a better term, war stories by veterans can be a really significant trigger for the nurses that had experience of helping people get back together again. The other things that can be different about this is it can be very difficult to get them to reflect. They are used to doing rather than thinking about how they feel. And possibly more seriously, they often tell us that they're okay when it appears from the outside that they very definitely are not okay. And I'll tell you a bit more about that in a moment. Can you change the slide, Sal? Thank you. So how do we measure how people are? So as well as doing all the formal evaluation processes that Sally mentioned, we do a finger in the wind wellbeing thermometer at the beginning and end of each session. So ask people to judge themselves on a scale of 1 to 10 how they're feeling that day as they come in, and the same again as they go out. We are hoping that the activities that they go through will lift their well-being. But it's also useful if you are looking at things that sometimes people who normally will come in, not necessarily DGS groups at 2 or 3, they'll come in at 7. So they've obviously had something really great happening. Or if somebody normally comes in at 7 and has a day that they come in at 2, you really know that you need to move in gently and find out what's happening. And in fact, something like that happened to me today. This is based on the distress thermometers that are used in hospices, but in this case, the scale is reversed, that an increase in number actually means an increase in well-being. What we found is that compared with the other groups that we see, that the Defence Garden Scheme participants often score themselves unusually high. So, for example, we had somebody in the garden relatively recently who is still serving, and had a significant injury. And because of that injury, he was medically downgraded in the parlance of the service that he was in. I think that's rather a brutal phrase myself, but the thing that really brought it to mind was he clearly felt personally downgraded, and we worked together in slightly isolated from the group and had a long conversation. And it was clear to me that he was very, very low indeed. So when I sort of, where I would expect somebody to be on a 1 or a 2 on a thermometer normally, when I looked at his thermometer, he'd scored himself as 9, which I must admit really shock me. Now, who am I to argue? I'm not inside his head. I do appreciate that. But it gave some sort of an indication to me that there is somebody that is part of a culture where injury and illness, particularly mental illness, can be seen as failure, and the drive is to keep going, and failure is not an option. So in places that encourage that sort of mindset, there's not a lot of room to acknowledge your distress. And what we aim to do at Vounder Therapy Garden is to create the space where, if there is distress that needs to be acknowledged, it can be done so safely. Okay, if you wouldn't mind turning over again. So these are a couple of the participants. The woman in the orange and black shirt, she says, pointing at the screen, you can't see me doing that, came to us in cohort 1. And Shirley Dens is the person in the orange and black, and Shirley, who's got the mallet in her hand, came in cohort 4. Dens's comment at the end of her cohort is this type of platform is so valuable to veterans, as you can see on there, and she felt the work was really appreciated. She also spoke a lot about the ability to work with people you didn't have to explain yourself to. She has complex PTSD. She was a naval chaplain and spent most of her time on board ship. So when she was discharged, she was not particularly well. At the end of the DGS cohort that she came on, she came up to us and said, look, before I became a chaplain, I was a cabinet maker, and I actually have a lot of woodworking skills, particularly green woodworking, and I think that I could give to further cohorts by teaching people how to make green woodworking equipment and stools, benches, and a whole variety of things by green woodworking. And that's what's happened. So Shirley, who is the next person, you can see that the mallet is blurred because she's that mallet is called a maul, and the thing she is hitting is called a froe, F-R-O-E, and it's a really old English word for a splitter of wood. And groups of people have made, let me think, stools, draw horses, mallets. They're appearing in people's homes all the way across the southwest. But actually, there is still nowhere to sit down in the garden because they keep taking their stools away. So we keep hoping that they will leave some behind. The overwhelming feeling that we get from working with the Defence Garden Scheme participants is that the ability to arrive somewhere that is safe and to bond with people that you don't have to explain yourself to is incredibly powerful. As a policy in the garden, we don't ask people what brought them there. Obviously, we have some sort of guardianship issues around that, and the referring partners will tell us what their diagnosis is, but we don't ask for their stories because we feel very strongly that people's stories are their own, and they are their own to tell in their own way, in their own time. And what happens over the time that people spend in the garden at the Defence Garden Scheme is that we quite often don't know what has happened at the beginning, but you find yourself working side by side with somebody, hands in the soil, and their story spill. And that enables us to do the support that Sally has talked about, and also to encourage people to be more reflective about how they are feeling. I'm happy to answer questions in the session that follows, but if anybody thinks about something later on, my email is there, and I'm very happy for you to drop me an email and carry on the conversation. And I'd like at this point to hand over to my colleague Imogen.
Thank you, Julia. Hi, so I'm Imogen, the programme lead and the horticultural therapy practitioner for Wild Transitions, the DGS garden run by the Wiltshire Wildlife Trust. Next slide, please, Sally. So this is the Harbour Garden, and Wiltshire Wildlife Trust, I think, have led the way as a wildlife trust in an understanding and a belief that nature's fundamental to people's well-being. And we're dedicated to bringing people closer to nature as a way of improving well-being and people's health and enjoyment of life. So we've got an array of different nature-based interventions, including care farms and forest schools that we run for children. And then adult wellbeing activities we've been running for about 11 years across Wiltshire and Swindon. So we focus on local communities and groups most in need of support with their mental health. And so we were delighted to have the opportunity to work alongside DGS to deliver this fabulous programme. Next slide, please. So our programme's a little bit different to some of the other DGS gardens and also to the other wellbeing programmes that we run across the Trust. So rather than visiting different nature reserves and green spaces in the local area, as we do with our other programmes, this one is centred around one garden. Used to be known as the education area and was used by the Trust for some of their forest schools. So we take groups of children over there and so on. But unlike the other DGS gardens and maybe what you would traditionally think of as a horticultural therapy garden, you're not going to see rows of raised beds or anything like that. Basically, what we had was a piece of fenced-in land with a wildlife pond, a couple of rather overgrown willow arches, a few young trees, and a fire pit. And right on the edge of an ancient woodland soon to be, potentially soon to be designated as a SSSI or a site of special scientific interest. But actually that makes it perfect for DGS participants. So we've got the fact it is fenced in and hedged all around helps to make them feel safe. So you can't be doing a trauma-sensitive programme. You can't be working with people in a trauma-sensitive way unless they feel safe. So that's absolutely fundamental to the programme. So rather than going to different spaces where maybe there'd be other members of the public walking by, this is purely for them. Nobody else is going to come into that space. People can talk openly and slowly start to feel at home in that space. The little wooded copse gives people a space that they can go to if they want some time on their own, a bit of quiet reflection, absolutely free to do that at any point they want to. The neglected willow arches have given people hours of quiet but productive sort of work. I've been amazed at how much they've enjoyed sort of working away on that. The woodland, the ancient woodland, and the pond, perfect for mindful moments. And then the fact that it's a blank canvas. So I've been able to, the aim is to create a forest garden. So I've basically explained the concept of a forest garden. I've talked about the importance of community and interdependence within the natural world, and of course for people as well. And then I've given them the chance to plan, design and take ownership of the garden and the space. And so that's exactly what they've done. Next slide, please. So the design so far. So basically what they've decided, what they've chosen to do is to base the garden loosely on a type of living wood henge. So we're in Wiltshire, so we've got Stonehenge and we've got Avebury Stone Circle and we've got Woodhenge, which is another Neolithic circle and monument, that's the word I was looking for. So yeah, and they've chosen trees to we're planting up concentric circles of trees, and they've chosen trees that are, so they're not only going to be useful, so they're either edible, they're useful for weaving, medicinal, to be used as dye plants, or they might be good for wildlife. But they've also got a symbolic meaning that's relevant to the veterans community. So we've got apple trees that symbolise life and growth. We've got pears for wisdom and protection. And we've got rowan for courage. They've also, they've extended the paths out and they've chosen to do that along the cardinal points. So we've got the north, east, south and west marked out. And they've decided to, as you can see there, in the middle, just to the left at the bottom, they've planted herbs all the way around the seat. So the seating around the fire pit. and they've chosen to plant herbs around there. So that's good for pollinators. It's good for making teas while you're sat there. You can use it in the cooking and any other sort of sensory experiences, and good for pollinators again. So yeah, they've totally sort of thrown themselves into that idea, and it's all come from them. So next slide, please. So as well as the planning, the design, and the physical work, a couple of other aspects that have been like hugely successful and important. So firstly, we've had the communal meal. So that's something we haven't particularly used in our other programs, but actually I want to start bringing in because it's been so important to the course. So we've been able to talk about the importance of a healthy diet for physical and mental health, but also for planetary health, being a wildlife trust, of course. So we talk about planetary health and compassion as well. So we also bring in the 5 pathways to nature connection, and compassion is one of those. So another aspect that I'm kind of quite surprised at how much they've embraced it was the mindfulness in nature. So we do a lot of mindfulness exercises, and those have been hugely beneficial for people. People have found them really calming and important for managing their well-being, and they've taken that away into their sort of daily lives and found that really useful. And then reflective journaling. So you can see here this image there on the right that one of our participants came up with, and she said the reflective journaling, she said it saved me really. So she would go away after each session, go home and do some of this fabulous drawing. She says she's never drawn before. And each week, I wish I could show you her whole journal. Each one is stunning and beautiful. She's done ivy bees, and there's a devil's coachman and dragonflies and so on. So this one kind of encompasses all of it. And the little bit down there looks like a pair of glasses, if you can see that, and a little wobbly bit. That's her sort of representation when she understood mindfulness. And she said it's like on one side you've got the looking, and then you get the wobble, and they're actually just seeing and just sort of letting all the senses come in rather than actually looking. And she found that so calming. And she would say at the end, when we do a sort of check-in at the end, she said, I feel happy. She said, I'm smiling. I really don't know what to do with that. I haven't felt that for so long. And she would say words to that effect at the end of each session. It was so powerful to work with her. Next slide, please. So just a few sort of comments and quotes from our participants. It's always nice to hear from them and what they've had to say. I will read them. Solace was found on the edge of an ancient wood with a Wiltshire Wildlife Trust leadership and a peer group where I learned how to foster relationships, work with nature, and lay down the foundation for what eventually became my pathway back from impaired mental health. And then we've got, I look forward to every Tuesday. I've never noticed so much intricacies in nature till I met Simon and Imogen. For me, it's been all about the people. I've been very self-isolating for a long time, and this has helped me reconnect with people. I've learned to laugh more, not take life so seriously, and to relax more. And then finally, this course has really helped me feel I have a sense of purpose. So I think that kind of says it all. But just a very quick sort of mention of a couple of people. I mean, I could tell you lots, but so Tom, he suffers extreme anxiety. He's got a young family, but would really struggle to go out anywhere with them. And since coming along and learning some techniques through connecting to nature and so on, he's found he's now able to attend sporting games. So he'd go to football match, and then he'd pace up and down the entire time. He could never stop, and he could never enjoy the match. And now he finds he can sit down. He's learned some techniques that managed to make, and he's there and he's enjoying it and he's absorbed in the game. And that's huge for him. And the other thing is he's been able to go on family holidays, which he just couldn't manage before. So, I mean, it's just transformational. It's been amazing. And then we've got George. So George, he was really unsure about joining the group. We had to have several Zoom calls with him before he came along, and along with his support worker as well, just to sort of reassure him and talk about what the group would be like, and to let him know he would have plenty of sort of autonomy and opportunity to take time out if he needed to. He's been self-isolated for a lot of years. He's had some really bad experiences in the workplace. He's autistic. He doesn't like to eat in front of other people. But throughout the course, he's been able to share. He's got an amazing set of skills and knowledge, and so he's added to those, and he's been able to share those skills. He now sits and eats, enjoys those communal meals. with everyone else. And he started to reintegrate into society and start make flat plans for the future. He's actually just been traveling around the world, actually, since the last cohort. And he's now going to come back as a volunteer to support other people. So he's going to be trained up in mental health first aid, and he's had his safeguarding training and so on. So he's going to come back and support the next cohort of people. And the final slide. So yeah, so that's my email address, and just like Julia said, I'm very happy if anyone wants to contact me, and to take your questions now. So yeah, that's the end of my slide. Just to explain that picture there, we did a little bit of whittling, and so that was his little man he made for his son, and his imitation of the figure that he made. Lovely, yeah. So that's the end of our slides, I think. Last few bits there from Sally.
Thank you, Jenny. That concludes our presentation. And just for everybody that's watching, we've just published our impact report for 2023. And as I know, you are able to disseminate that if anybody wants to find out more information. But thank you very much from us.
Thank you so much to Sally, Julia, and Imogen. And I'm going to hand over now to Fiona, who's going to voice some of the questions. I think there's quite a few here. Sally, would you mind unsharing your screen?
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
There are quite a lot of questions. And so I'll voice a few, but also if we have enough time, I'll invite you to put your hands up if you'd like to speak and speak directly to the presenters. Thank you, that was so interesting. And I think that's reflected in the number of questions and comments we have. So let's get started with those. First of all, I thank you, Anna Baker-Cresswell says, thanks so much, Sally. Absolutely fascinating. And outdoors is better. And I don't think anyone here is going to argue with that. So thank you, Anna. Jenny asked, how do you get your referrals? And can people self-refer? And possibly that was partly covered in your presentations, but maybe you could cover that in a more universal way.
Thank you. Yes, it wasn't, there's so much detail in all of the processes. And so, as I mentioned, our focus is the swim lane of delivering and evaluating the course, and we partner with delivery partners. So predominantly, and in some ways, in an ideal world, all of them would come from a single referral partner like Help for Heroes or with Walking with the Wounded or Brook House. So these are the people that are looking after veterans in a comprehensive and a holistic way. They may be doing CBT, they may be doing other parts of therapy, but they believe, and the individual believes, that green therapy would be part of their journey. So they refer to the course. If somebody does self-refer in the local area, we find there's about a 1.5 hour radius for people to attend a course once a week. And that was consistent across my experience in Scandinavia, and particularly in Denmark and in the States. Then we would make sure that they are linked in to a veterans mental health charity. So basically we have a handover process from the partners. We would never have 8 different referral partners. And part of that is risk management, because we wouldn't want the therapist to not know who immediately to go back to at the end of the session if there was something that they needed to raise on a risk awareness. But obviously, if it's 2 or 3, and now we're more established over 4 or 5 years in all the different places, we know who those people are. But if there was a difficult conversation that needed escalating or feeding back to the case manager, so we probably have 2 or 3 as a maximum: Help for Heroes, Walking with the Wounded, Combat Stress, in any one location. Was that the whole question? How do they, and sorry, if they self-refer, we would link them into, we would say, we'd make sure that they would, but they don't tend to come to us. I mean, referrals come, that's the role of the delivery partner, to load the course. What we do have in Northern Ireland, and we will have in other regions, but we haven't yet done, we have a regional coordinator. So while I'm at a national level, Charlie Marno is our regional coordinator for Northern Ireland. We have 2 hubs in Northern Ireland. I envisage we will have 2 in Scotland, 2 in Wales, and obviously more in England, in the right locations. But Charlie does that role. So somebody be fed into Charlie and he would link them into the garden.
Sure. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks. Sounds really safe, robust and sensible and accessible system, comprehensive for referrals. Anya in Florence has asked, please, may I know which kind of assessment tools have been used to evaluate activities? So this is kind of within the project.
Yeah.
To see
So
what
we
the
have always,
might...
there's a little bit of history there. So when we started, based on our experience learning about evaluation on the Masters. So when we started in 2019, we used the Long, Warwick and Edinburgh Wellbeing Scale, and also GAD-7, a generalised, When we started, we used generalized anxiety disorder, GAD-9, and PHQ-7, patient healthcare 7. So we used 2 back in 2019. We always evaluate in week 2 and week 9. We took advice on that. We don't want to sort of break the forming of the group and the owning of the group in week 1, and then we have a certificate session at the end. And again, where the families can come, we don't want to be form filling. So we do our evaluations in week 2 and week 9. When we started to engage with our evaluation partners ready for transformational nature-based prescriptions, we'd already moved to the Long, Warwick and Edinburgh. And one of the reasons for that, which I will share, because I was slightly startled to discover it, is that GAD-7 and PHQ-9, which are used by general practitioners in the NHS, have been developed by pharmaceutical companies. And they do involve a question that says, have you considered taking your own life recently? And so they are slightly looking back, and they are to measure the efficiency of a medical intervention, which we're not. And we also didn't feel completely comfortable. Practitioners were feeding back. You're building a relationship with somebody and you're asking them a question. They may not have even considered taking their own life, and it doesn't necessarily set the right tone. So we had already moved to Long, Warwick and Edinburgh, which is 15 questions. And that was 1 questionnaire taking over from the 2, the 7 and the 9. So that was a slight move forward in the sense of less form filling. But I do think this is important move forward. Under transformational nature-based prescriptions, we're doing our evaluation in accordance with Treasury guidelines on commissioning of community-based interventions. And the Treasury are only interested in the short Warwick and Edinburgh. So bearing in mind, if that's where we're headed to talk to the Department of Health and Social Care, if that's what the Treasury want, we have now moved since the last course, the first course of TMP in the autumn, to the short Warwick and Edinburgh. And the other scale that the Treasury is particularly interested in is the ONS4, which is a life satisfaction questionnaire, the Office for National Statistics, 4 questions on life satisfaction. So for TMP, the major project that I outlined and the data collecting on 100 over 3 cohorts, we're using short Warwick and Edinburgh and ONS4. And I fully expect that we'll continue to do that after TMP.
Great. I think everyone's learning such a lot from that very clear and very detailed answer to the question. Thank you. Another one from Jenny. Do people come with their own goals and aims in mind for their health?
Very well, actually, why don't I let Imogen or Julia answer that? It was a very good question.
I'm happy to answer that. I think what happens for the most part is no, they don't come for with their own aims.
That's what I would have said.
In mind. But because we have conversations about what are you hoping to get out of this, what are you expecting, those sorts of things, by the time you are 2 or 3 weeks in, then you have usually formulated what an individual wants to get out of it. And it can be things like, I don't normally speak to people, and it can be just say hello to 1 new person for the next 3 weeks. You know, it doesn't need to be very, very big. Or sometimes people come and they really want to, in our case, my colleague James trained in an apple orchard. I really want to learn how to prune apple trees. Over you go, James is your man. So it can be very, very simple. But behind those very simple aims can be a whole complexity. And we had somebody who came because he wanted to get used to saying hello to people. And then when he fed back right at the end, said, actually, it's much easier for me to go into town and do my shopping, because now I have said hello to some people I didn't know. It means that going in is nowhere near as much of a strain. So I'm nowhere near as anxious. Did you find something similar, Imogen?
Yeah, I think for us, it's been quite often people have wanted ways of managing their anxiety. They're really keen. They're all been really keen to be working outside, sometimes learning new skills in relation to horticulture or sort of woodland management, that kind of thing that we're able to offer as well. But yeah, so skills in managing mental health. Yeah, anxiety generally.
Anxiety is a big one,
Yeah.
a big one for us as well.
Thank you. Helen's asking about average age of attendees, with an interest in perhaps that tallying with various or linking with various conflicts. Do you have any data on the average age of attendees?
We don't have sort of analysed data. I think we may get it out of TMP. It does tend to be older, but I think that is skewed, in fairness, by the fact that we started life in Northern Ireland, and the cohort in Northern Ireland does tend to be older. We're particularly interested in supporting, and obviously we had that, not a setback, but a delay in rolling out with COVID. But we're particularly interested in working age veterans, and we're particularly pleased that we've started working in the prison in Northern Ireland. I think we're all aware that mental health tends to come out about 14 years after a trauma. And so I'm particularly interested in the 30-year-old who 12 years ago was 18, or no, we're just getting past that period for Afghanistan, but where we really can make a transformational difference in helping them think about next steps, as opposed to, say, where we started, which has been veterans from the Troubles in the 70s, who realistically are in their 60s and 70s. So while we're supporting them and helping them with the social isolation and the extra issues of isolation in Northern Ireland, we're not making as much of a difference to their lives. But that is beginning to happen. And as we go to Manchester and Liverpool and Glasgow, and places where soldiers are recruited from and then tend to return to, I think the average age will come down.
Our average age is considerably lower than that.
Yes, with the in-service.
Yeah, because we have quite a chunk of in-service people, and our youngest was 20. I think our oldest is 74, but most of them are 20, 30, 40. So
it's a good point. I probably answered more on the historical, well, the Northern Ireland, and because we have two hubs there, and because we've been there for so long. But it would be a good thing to start to collect and analyse, and that's helpful from Julia. Yeah.
Great to have
I'd say ours are sort of 35 to 55-ish.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. It's great to have that history and to see that shift, and also to have something to work towards, that you want to bring in people so you can help them before they've been living for years with trauma and disabled by mental health problems. Great. Okay, a stimulating question there. Now, the next question is from John, and it's partly been answered by Fee Brown, who's with us because she's covered the Lynburn aspect, which it refers to. But I'll read it anyway in case anyone would like to answer, because Fee does say she'll let the others answer more formally. Thinking of the hub garden at Lynburn, do you welcome visitors when clients are present? And I believe there's a hub at Barshaw, Paisley. Is that operational? And from what distance do clients travel to a project?
So
Fee has answered. Can you see? She runs it. You've seen that. Is there anything you'd like to add?
I haven't seen Fee's. I'm deliberately not sort of getting sidetracked from concentrating on what you ask.
Yeah. She just says, I run the Lynburn project. I'll let the others answer more formally. The recent course we had people from North Edinburgh via Veterans Housing Scotland, and they're going to have a chat later. So they'll cover more of those questions. But
so the answer to the question is yes, all the gardens, including Fee at Lynburn, welcome visitors. We always have an open day, so that's the sort of formal opportunity, and all the ones for the spring programmes are advertised on the website or available on the website, and Lynburn is the 18th of April from memory. So that's the easiest way, and we've got 2 courses running at Lynburn, spring and autumn, so there'll be another one in the autumn in September. The sessions then run every week, and traditionally visitors do not go. It is a closed programme between, let's say, for example, 11 and 2. But as the courses develop and the group settles down, then it would be perfectly possible to get in touch with the programme if you were interested and had missed an open day, and particularly if you were a referral partner or you wanted to bring somebody that was interested. What tends to happen is you then go at about 1:30 or 2 o'clock, the group leader would say somebody's coming, and those veterans that are leaving would leave. And and once the groups have settled down in about weeks 5 and 6, they quite often want to. But it's a decision when the course is running for the group lead, but it's certainly flexible. So that's Lymburn, which is fully funded for this year. We have got an opportunity to work at Barshall Park in the walled garden in the park, and we fully intend to do that. I think that will be the second hub in Scotland. We just haven't at the moment had the capacity to apply for funding, but it's certainly the next, I'm sure that's what will happen over the next probably 2 years.
Thank you. There you go, John.
And sorry, the final bit was this hour and a half. It does tend to be about an hour and a half's radius where people traditionally come on the bus in the rain with a lift or whatever. It's not more than that, but that seems pretty consistent.
Great. And from Joan now, I hope that answers your question, by the way, John. Joan asks, do any of the gardens accommodate sessions for veterans' family members?
Again, I probably talk from a national perspective. Yes. So depending on the grant that we have, we fund the 2 programs a year, and then family days. We use the certificate day if the group is happy to do it, which it often is, as a family day. But it really depends on the funding at that particular garden. But Lymburn is a good case in point. There are family days there, we're certainly increasingly more for, having started on a nucleus of a veteran-only 10-week course, we have workshop days for Armed Forces community family.
Great, thank you. And one of the comments or feedback comments from one of the veterans did mention how their wife was impressed and grateful for the changes they saw. So it's clearly important to have that wider focus. I'm going to skip a couple of questions from our team so that we can include one from Sally here. Where do the veterans, and I'll come back to those if we've got time, where do the veterans go after the programme? Can they reattend or volunteer, or do most find a new path? And actually, Jenny's questions were similar. Where do people move on to? And how do they move on to community gardens? And do any of them come back to socialise and see how the garden is? So they're kind of destination questions about what happens after the 10-week course.
I won't, looking at the time, go back to the slides, but one of the slides I took out in the sense of how did I balance the whole thing. We do, and part of the manual, in week 7, we talk about progression. So community reintegration, and I particularly like a definition by Dr. Karen Bester-Mandan, who I met at the University of Tampa in South Florida. Community reintegration, finding veterans, age, sex, and culturally appropriate roles in workplace, family, and society. And when you dissect that sentence, it really, you can, what's the right thing for an 18-year-old or a 21-year-old early service leaver? What's the right thing for a retired person? So we do talk about progression in week 7, and we do have a range of support. So we have a bespoke self-employment program called Defender to Entrepreneur. If somebody was interested in doing the Royal Horticultural Society, particularly level 2 employability course, they can go on to that. But again, a bit like my response to Jenny about referrals, this role is for the referral partner. So we obviously have time in week 7 to talk about it. We bring in a veteran or a link worker that can help them explore other things, but we very much make sure that's fed back in the handover. We don't own their recovery pathway. We're not responsible for them. We don't hold all their data, and we deliver a piece of therapy that is relevant to their wider pathway. So we feed that back, but we obviously do have contacts with regimental associations. We do know how to access individual funding, and so it's a case-by-case basis. Our leaflets, we have little leaflets that everybody, and we have a progression wheel, and we have various things that they can go on to do. So it is an integral part of the program. It's an integral part of the manual, but it's something we work with the delivery partners, the gardens. But I know Julia, and probably Imogen as well, can add to that.
Yeah, we deliver the RHS level 1, not the employability horticultural qualification, but the initial horticultural qualification. at Eden, and that is in an integrated group. It's not for veterans only, and we've had a number of people come out of DGS and go into that. We've also had a number of people both volunteer on future DGS cohorts, but actually more interestingly have gained enough confidence to go and volunteer at the main Eden site itself. Cornwall has a lot of different horticultural opportunities for people, and there are various orchards being set up and things like that. But because the county is very long and thin, you know, you can be quite limited around a particular person's home, but we try our best. And we have a social prescribing link worker to get people to understand what is available around where they live. We don't consciously invite people back to the garden to socialise, but we do invite them back for events so that they know that, you know, they don't drop off a cliff on the day that they pick up their certificate, but they don't just drop in either. And I think that's quite important for the integrity of the groups that follow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
I think we may have to wrap it up there for questions just because of time. I just have one more. It's more of an invitation than a question, but I would like to say, would you join us in celebrating World Therapeutic Horticulture Day in May on the 18th and the week running up to that? I hope you would share some of your activities. I think that would really help the impact. And thank you so much. It's been so interesting.